Hello folks, in today's video I'm going to build a wing, and because it's a biplane that I'm building, Tony Ray's Tiger Moth, it's one of four wings. In many ways it's very conventional. It consists of two spars. What's unusual for me is that it's a laser cut model, and that means very precise joins between all the components. The leading spar goes through the middle of the ribs, and it's this feature which I think produces a very strong but lightweight wing. So if you like watching model building or you like doing model building, why not get yourself your favourite tipple in your hand and sit and watch a wing being constructed? Let's get started. Let's get building a wing then. Now the first thing in this design, there's a little bit of preparation to do, and what I've actually done here, the main spars are both spruce, I believe it's spruce, and then it has a hard infill on this main spar, a laminate that you have to glue together. So in preparation, they've been glued together and been allowed to set, and obviously because it's a lamination, it's going to dramatically increase the strength of the structure. So that's done. The rear spar is just a straightforward piece of spruce, and I've got the ribs out. I've selected them from the sheets. They sort of bounce around a bit on the sheets, but they're all clearly marked. I've put them in order as shown on here, and there's the little one that goes on the tip. And I've given them a very light sanding to remove the scorching caused by the laser cutting. I'm not too worried about removing it all. I just put the main spar through the centre, through the central hole, keeping them square, put them on a flat surface and give them a light rub over. So they're all prepped. The thing to do now is actually to thread them on. So you slide them onto this main spar as opposed to placing them down over the top. And that's why it's important to get them in order, so you don't end up having to shuffle them all around again. So I'm going to just put them down. They fit on okay, they're not too tight and they're not too slack. I'm going to use PVA glue to glue this. Once it's all in position and all pinned down. So the first thing, obviously I'll carry on threading these on. When they're all on, we line it up with the rear spar and we'll actually start building the wing. This is just a dry fit, and you can see it looks rather nice already. When it comes to the front spar, you need to ensure that the spruce part of the spar is on the front. Don't ask me how I know. I had to take it all back apart. And that's why you do a dry fit. So it's all lined up. It's just not glued in yet. And what I'm going to do is slot the trailing edge of the ribs into the trailing edge itself, and they've got nice little recesses, and that helps it lock together. And when I've done that, I'm going to use super glue, CA, on these joints because they're very neat. These are a little slacker than need to be to allow the ribs to slide on, so to speak. And I'm going to use the white glue, PVA, for that. And I'm going to weigh this rear spar down with some small sandbags that I have. And then it's just a case of leave it and then come back. Oh, sorry, the leading edge will be glued on. I'll CA that in place as well. Super glue. Somebody asked what I meant by CA. They were thinking contact adhesive. No, it's abbreviation for super glue. So I'll glue that along the leading edge, and when it's all set, I can start adding the other parts, the riblets, for example, and some of the fixing points for the interplane struts. So we'll get this lined up. I'll get it glued on. I think I may get it weighed down before I do anything else and then start applying the glue. Just give me a second. This is all still just dry fitted. I've used pins to make sure that these are parallel to one another all the way along. A little packing's needed here on the wingtip because there's a slight rise here when it's a nice neat fit which holds it in place, but I've put a little bit of packing there just to ensure that it doesn't move. The leading edge needs to be glued on, and I'll leave it surplus length and cut that off when it's all set. As I said, super glue all of these joints, white glue for this. What I've noticed, and it's interesting, the end rib, which I haven't got on yet, the end rib is at an angle, and that means that when the wing is constructed, all of the ribs won't be pointing straight forward on the wing because it's swept. And that's actually a scale feature which is correct, because the original de Havilland design was for a straight wing, and to achieve the swept back wing on the Tiger Moth, they simply cut the wing and raked it back, and that meant that the ribs weren't pointing directly forward. They were actually slightly canted over. So that's actually a scale feature you might think looks odd when you're doing, but that's correct. So I'm going to start applying the white glue first around these joints, all the way around, pushing it into the joint because there is a little bit of movement in this main spar. For practical reasons, I think you have to have a little bit more give to allow the spar to slide through the ribs. And running straight through the centre makes for a very strong joint. The wings are relatively lightly, well, very lightly in my view, constructed. If this was a traditional radio control model, I think would be a lot beefier than this. But then again, from what I understand, the rigging on this model is functional. And that's going to mean that you don't have to beef it up with interwebs packing and such like. We'll see, time will tell. I'm sure it's been well thought out. And Cliff Harvey, who's obviously way ahead of me in terms of, he's already done the Maiden and the Maiden Plus One and ironed out a couple of issues. He assures me that the wings are fine. There's no diagonal bracing in them as you would in a conventional design. And he says they're plenty strong enough. So I'll stand with that. And I've also seen Tony Ray's models fly, his prototype, both as an electric and as a with a 4-stroke engine in it, and it looked very nice and performed very well. So fingers crossed this will be the same. I'm sure it will be. So I'll carry on doing this, and then I'll zap all the other joints with some super glue, and then once that's done, we can come back and see how it looks. Do the next stage. The glue's now set. We've got the first wing panel done. However, there's some more pieces to add. The end plates need to be added, and you need to be really careful with this. See if I can show you. So obviously the end panel needs to set the dihedral angle for the lower wing. It would have been advantageous, I think, perhaps to have an angle plate that you could use as a jig. However, it is actually built into the spar if you look very closely at it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue these two pieces together using white glue, but I'm going to use super glue to actually attach them to the end plates. Now, epoxy is going to be added when the locating lugs are put in, so that'll be strengthened anyway there. The reason I want to use the super glue is I want to get the angle spot on, and I don't want it to move, because the only guide I've got is the end of this spar and the angle on this spar. So I need to get it right, and I'll get it right by holding it in position, hitting it so it doesn't move. That's the plan of action. Let's see if I can put it in place and still get in to do this without blocking myself out. So I'm going to use white glue for here, and for the main spar, as I said, I'm going to lock it in place with some super glue. I've said this on a number of videos. Those that have followed the channel will probably be bored of saying this, but for those who are new to it, I've been modelling in one form or another since I was about 12, 13. I'm 63 now. And the biggest change I've seen in that period of time has been the advancement in adhesives. All kinds of glues are available to do all kinds of different jobs. And when I first started out, you were very, very limited in what glues were available to you. I remember it was a big deal when PVA came out, to be quite honest with you. So that shows me age a bit. So these will go together. I may clamp them as well. Might not need it, to be honest with you. So you have that one on the outside, this on the inside, and a plate's going to go in there. I'm just going to double check I've got the right one here. Just pause a moment. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'd had to do a double take. I wasn't sure I was getting this right. So let's get this on. Get it flat against there. Yeah, happy with that. Gone quiet because I'm concentrating. Nice, that's on. Okay, happy with that. Now you can see here I've got a multitude of riblets. There's 20 in total. You don't want to watch me gluing 20 of these in. And basically they slide in like this. And you line them up, eyeing them from above. And when you're happy with them, you zap them with either some super glue or some PVA white glue. And I'm going to actually put white glue on and leave it at that. We'll get all those set in, and then we'll see what the wing looks like before any of the hardware gets put in place. As you can see, the wing's now being completed. Well, at least the basic structure has. And I now have to add on the fixtures and fittings which hold the wing onto the fuselage. Also fixing points for the inter-wing struts and for the rigging. So the first thing that I've done is I've taken the parts that make up this locating plug, which holds the wing onto the cabin and the fuel tank. And it's made up of two outer layers of steel and a wood infill, and I've glued them together. But I did check beforehand because I'd been warned that the wood might be slightly too thick. It turned out not to be the case. It's a perfect fit, or at least in this kit, but it's worth checking because if you make this up and then you go to fit it, you're going to have to take out the file and do some fettling on the cabin fuel tank area, because you can't really thin this down once it's glued together. But I did check it beforehand. It slides in here, and it's a neat fit, and then that's bound on with some Kevlar, and it'll be epoxied, which I'll do a little bit later. The second fixing point takes the form of this T-piece of steel with a small hole in it. The one that's on the bottom wing has a larger hole for a bigger bolt. It neatly fits into the end here. Hope you can see that. And then there's a plate at the back where the bolts are secured and with nuts. So I'll do that today. And then the fixing points for the struts are here, and you have to take care because they are handed. I'm assuming that's so that the struts line up correctly to do with the swept wing. So I'll glue those in place. In fact, that'll probably be the first job I'll do. I will point out something I've noticed with this forward one that I'm going to slightly alter. But let's get this glued in first. We'll make some progress this morning. So I'll put some glue on here. I'm using super glue in this case. We'll put it in. And then to make up the thickness so that the screws have something to bite into, there are 2 more pieces of wood to glue on. An inner one. And an outer one to make it flush with the surface. And there's one to go on the outside. That's that done. Now, the forward one on the main here, it's only got a hole in one side, and you actually put it, I'm doing this in reverse so you can see on the plan, you put it on so that the hole's on the inside of the wing. So if I do that, there's a couple of things that strike me. One, it's a little bit low, which I'll pack out. But the other one is the second hole will simply be screwed into this soft balsa. And I don't think that's a very good fixing point for the strut from a practical point of view. I don't know why that's been done. Perhaps it was just the intricacy of, well, you would have to make a separate one of these to allow for that. So I understand why it's been not done like that. But what I'm going to do is I've made a replacement from a piece of the scrap wood. I'm going to cut out this part of the riblet and replace it with this piece of wood here. And that, I think, it'll give a much more solid fixing point than screwing just one screw in and the other one going through the balsa, which would crush. So I'll discard that, but remember which way around it goes. And it's this one here that I need to cut off. I'll do that, and then we'll come back when it's glued in. Well, these are glued in place now. This one will need drilling to take the screws, but we can sort that out later on. Next thing, I'll turn my attention to the fixing brackets for the end of the wing. Okay, let's fix this. I've selected a couple of the short 2mm screws out here, and there's a plywood keeper plate with the nuts inserted in and pressed in. I'm just going to simply screw this in place, and then once it's in place, I'm going to run a little bit of CE around the plywood plate, and that'll hold it in place because it's not coming on or off. Once it's on, it's on. Just line it up, screw it on. That's done, and as I say, I'll run a little bit of CA around here. That's going to hold it on, it's not going to go anywhere. A little bit of CA on the end of the nut, which will go into the thread and stop it moving. So that's that task done. Now the next bit, I've had a good look at it, and it involves a little bit of wood removal, because these brackets, which are for the rigging, I believe, they go on, there's 2 of them. Now I assumed they went on that way. And if they went on that way, you wouldn't have to cut anything out of here. But as it is, I don't think it's possible to do it that way anyway. And it's shown on the photographs that the brackets are actually mounted like that, which is fine for the one on this side, but it means you'll have to cut out a little slot on that side. That's what it shows on the photograph, so that's what I'm going to go with. I'll open this out along this edge. It's only 1/2 mil. Seems an odd thing to do, but you know, let's stick with it. So I'll whittle away at that, and then when I'm happy with it, we'll screw those on. Well, that was a bit of a pain, but anyway, it's cut out now, it's bolted on, and what I'm going to do now is glue these little finishing pieces on, which allows you to cover up to the fittings. Without these, you wouldn't be able to cover up to them, it would be awkward. So I'll glue those on, and then the final task is going to be to strap this on and use the Kevlar and the epoxy to finish it off. So I'll do that, and then we'll have a little wrap up at the end. There we have it then. It's bound on with some Teflon tape. I've added actually an extra couple of gussets here, because it struck me that at the root of this part of the wing is a weak point, with only that point there being glued, which isn't a great deal. So I've tied the whole lot together by putting this hardwood gusset in here and a one in here, and I might actually build up the edge here just to give me something else to cover when it comes to covering. You have to think ahead a little bit when you're doing these things. So there you have it. There's the building of a balsa wing. Overall, I think it's very well designed, and it's surprisingly rigid, because that the ribs rather, the spar goes all the way through them, through the middle of them. Now that's not easy to do if you're scratch building a model. It's not an easy task to get right and as accurately as it is with a laser cut plan. Hence most of traditional builds would have a bottom spar here, fed in from below, and you place the ribs down. But this is an extremely strong and light wing. I'm very impressed with it. So it's a biplane, so there's 3 more to go. Stay tuned, folks, and I'll show you the progress as and when it gets completed. Thumbs up if you don't mind, subscribe, if you haven't already done so, and I'll put the links to Cliff Harvey's build. It's a really excellent series and I've gained a great deal from it, and I'm sure you will. Even if you don't build this model, there are lots of tips along the way generally about aero modelling. Take care, folks. Let's get creative.